Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 160 for the National Land Podcast. My name is Mac Christian. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for National Land Realty and the host of this podcast. Now, today is a special guest. We're talking to Jesse Allen. Jesse Allen has a lot of titles. Try to read all these titles. He does a lot. So he's the Farm and Ranch Director for the American Ag Radio Network, which sees him also host the Agriculture of America show. It's in 50 stations nationwide and also SiriusXM. He is also the host of Market Talk, which is a podcast related to agriculture and agriculture news. He does this on the daily. If you want to talk to somebody that knows who is in touch with agriculture throughout the United States, Jesse Allen is definitely the person to talk to. Today, we sat down to talk about what he does for Agriculture of America and to get a pulse of agricultural markets throughout the United States and what's affecting our markets. Now, we've done a lot of episodes recently, and we touch on this about, we've talked a lot about corn and soybeans, and that is the primary headlines that we see nationwide. But today, we wanted to dive into some of the other areas, kind of go down the rabbit hole on some things outside of your typical corn and soybeans conversation. Tariffs obviously plays a role into this talk, but we touch on a lot of other things, including the mental health of our agricultural workers throughout the United States. It's a very cool conversation. You're going to learn something from this. And remember, subscribe to our podcast. Make sure you don't miss our next episodes. Thank you and enjoy. Okay, so I am sitting here with Jesse Allen. Jesse Allen is the Vice President of National Ag Content for Farm. He works with the Agriculture of America syndicated talk radio show. And what is it? You got 60 stations that you're working with. You're on Sirius. You're all over the place. You are probably the most acclimated to the podcast and radio environment guest I think that we've probably had. We were just talking beforehand. You do this a lot. I do this as a byproduct of nobody else in the company wanting to run a podcast 3 years ago, and now I'm still on it, like 157 episodes. But tell us a bit about what you do. Tell us like how you got there, you know what's going on with farm and Agriculture of America.
Well, Mac, I really appreciate you having me on and getting to have a conversation. I'm looking forward to this. This is a lot of fun. I've had a few folks on from National Land Realty here recent months on my program, AOA, as well. So it's good to kind of get some of that cross collaboration. And to your point, I mean, this is my thing. I do this every single day. So I'm always happy to have a conversation. As you said, I'm the Vice President of National Ag Content for Farm, which is short for Farm and Ranch Media. And that's a relatively new company brand name. We launched that at the end of 2024 to kind of encompass all of our networks or brands or however you want to put it. So as you said, I host Agriculture of America. It is a syndicated ag talk radio show. It's on 60 some stations in SiriusXM 147 each and every weekday, talking with everyone from senators and congressmen and women to USDA officials to commodity organizations, folks throughout the industry, markets, weather, agronomy, you name it. It's kind of that all-encompassing conversation about what's happening in agriculture. I also host a second show that's more of our podcast, but it's also syndicated to some radio stations, and that's called Market Talk. That is strictly a deep dive into markets, commodities, grains, livestock, you name it, all those trends. That is every afternoon. That goes to radio and posts up to our YouTube channel. And then the third leg of our farm stool, we have the American Ag Network, which is kind of your traditional short form markets, weather, news that you hear on radio stations across the country. We're predominantly in the Dakotas and Nebraska and into Iowa as well with that network. And at this point, I oversee that network more. You'll still hear my voice there a little bit, but we have a couple other great broadcasters who handle that now. So that's kind of that's the farm umbrella, so to speak. And I manage all of our content and our broadcasters and whatnot across farm and ranch media. So that's kind of everything in a quick nutshell, Mac.
How do you end up because the whole, I'm going to call it a genre, the whole genre of ag media is sort of, it started really kind of ballooning probably, I don't know, 6 years ago, and it's become more and more of a thing. And now you could just throw a rock in any given direction in the Midwest or out West and hit an influencer in the ag space. Mm-hmm. It's a thing now. And that rural lifestyle, commodities have always been a discussion point, but it was a little more niche, right? If you didn't own and operate a farm or a ranch, you weren't really paying attention to it. But now it's got sort of this mass appeal. How do you get in? How did you step foot into this door? Like, where did you get here from?
So, and to your point, there has been a lot more of folks kind of, showing up and interested in ag media, but farm broadcasting as an industry has been around for years upon years.
The radio shows have been kicking around for a while now.
Yeah, we're actually talking ahead of. I'll be in Kansas City here next week for the National Association of Farm Broadcasting annual convention, and I believe it's the 84th or 85th convention that they have for that association, which has been predominantly radio broadcasters who are farm broadcasters. That person that maybe your grandparents or your parents or you still, sit and you hear them on the radio as you're having coffee or you're driving the tractor or whatever, and they give you the market report or they tell you what happened at the sale barn or whatever the case may be. That industry in itself has been around for decades. I started in 2013 and I kind of fell into it. I was going to college for journalism in South Central Iowa. I'm from Northern Iowa originally. Took an internship back home at my radio stations in Mason City, summer before my senior year, met all the people there. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I was like, I kind of like this radio thing, and met their farm broadcaster at the time. Well, fast forward to the spring of my senior year, that farm broadcaster, Mark Dorenkamp, had moved to Des Moines to WHO Radio, which is where I did another internship. He looked at, we talked a little bit more, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, they don't have anyone in my role in Mason City. You should apply." And I said, "Mark, I don't know. I mean, I grew up in a small farming community of 100 people. I don't know how to be a farm broadcaster." But he's like, "Trust me, you should apply. They really liked you up there. I can show you what you need to know." Well, that ended up being a 2-day crash course in how to read the markets. I applied, I got hired, and here we are. I've come a long way and I've learned a lot since then, but it was really one of those things where I didn't know what I was stepping into, and I kind of fell into it. But now I have such an admiration for telling the story of agriculture. I mean, I live and breathe it, each and every day now. And I absolutely am humbled to get to tell the story of our farmers and ranchers each and every day. I truly mean that. And growing up in a small farming community, I mean, I'm no stranger to it, but yeah, it's an industry that has definitely grown and changed. And to your point, there's a lot more podcasters, influencers, you name it. There's a lot of folks who are getting into ag media in several different ways. And I think it's awesome. I'm glad to see more people in the industry and helping to tell the story. And it's, the rise of social media and more has really helped kind of with the boom. But, for me, I kind of fell into it, the old school way. And here we are.
Yeah, I was going to say there's been several that have emerged. Like you've got a millennial farmer and farmer choice, and like there's these avenues to where it's like you're exactly right. The syndication of radio AM radio has been like a haven for stuff like this forever. Different FM networks. Then you have RFD TV that's always been kind of a haven for it. I can't go to my mom's house without seeing either a cattle auction or RFD TV on the thing, and like that's what rolls on the TV. But there are it's kind of there's been this like sort of lifestyle brand that has emerged alongside in the last few years, and mass media helps that out. But I think people are just getting into it, and it's sort of becoming a voice for, like, people are starting to find a voice, and it's it's not like people in urban areas really get ready access to any kind of rural lifestyle, but then now they can, and it becomes entertainment, and it's cool. It's a neat kind of thing, and you're in the middle of it. You're in the middle of this thing.
Yeah, middle of it, and part of legacy brands, I guess, or kind of the legacy arm of ag media. And there's, I think it brings up the thought and the question too of there's a lot more folks getting into it, but also there's so many different sources for people to get information about agriculture. And I think we've seen a little bit of this too, is that you still have people who kind of fall back on trusted sources still. And that's a big thing, with journalism in general right now and everything else. They tend to try to gravitate towards the folks that they know they can trust, and they know that their work is vetted and authentic. And I think as an industry, we're kind of going through some of that change right now because there's so many people coming into ag media. It's great, but also folks got to be a little bit careful to make sure you're finding the right sources. And I think that's more for maybe consumers than it is for folks in the ag industry. I think the ag industry definitely knows, but you get some consumers out there who maybe get the wrong message from someone who maybe just didn't deliver it accurately enough, things like that. Like that's with every industry though, I think, Mac. I think we see that so much these days, and the rise of AI and things like that, that question's always going to be there as well. And so that's a big challenge for us, is how do we cut through the noise, and how do we as a company deliver the best possible content that we can that is going to be important to and resonate with folks throughout agriculture, and even consumers who are wanting to understand U.S. agriculture.
And you just spoke to something that I've talked about it a lot on this podcast. And you just mentioned you're from a small town in the Midwest, and I come from a town of 400 people in Idaho. It's a mountain town thing, and when you get into ag and you get into rural America, there is a skepticism of outside, right? Like are you from here? Do you understand what I'm going through in my area? And because there's a whole bunch of reasons for it, and I think all of them are valid, but wanting a vetted and trusted source and providing vetted and trusted information to an audience that's going to be skeptical of you, that's a big deal, and it's a hump to overcome when you are putting out media into the rural space. It's a thing, and you have found that voice with what you're doing. I kind of want to jump in here a little bit to some of the conversations that you're having lately on your show, or the various shows that you do. But with a lot of what we've been covering lately has been, of course, the corn and soybean thing, tariffs and impact. I kind of wanted to see, because we beat that one to death, and I'm sure that you have too, what are some of the other conversations that you're having around the country with people that you're getting on? Most of the stuff that we get is ag related, and of course land value related. But what's some of the other conversations that are kind of popping up in your realm?
Well, and to your point, the tariffs, soybeans, corn, you name it. Yeah, we've definitely beat that to death as well, and for good reason. I mean, it's a key story. Yeah, it's a talking point, and trying to track the day-to-day ebbs and flows of that is critical to the industry. Tied in with that is just the overall ag economy and liquidity in rural America. A lot of concern from producers about soaring input costs, whether it be seed, chem, fertilizer, you name it. That's a very big conversation, especially right now, gearing up for 2026. What is that going to look like? What are those banker conversations going to look like? There's some folks who are really struggling, really hurting right now, and maybe, didn't make the best financial decisions on their operation over the last several years with high commodity prices and things like that. So that's out there. That's a big story. The cattle industry, obviously all the volatility there, all the talk from the president about high beef prices and potential investigation into meat packers now, and the record high prices we've seen in cattle lately, combined with the lowest cattle inventory we've had in 60 years here in the U.S. and, the screwworm issue in Mexico and all these different things. So the beef industry as a whole, that's a very hot topic right now. Mental health, I think, tied in with all this too. That's been a bigger conversation that I've been having and been hearing from a lot of folks on here lately. Just prioritizing your mental health on the farm and ranch and across rural communities, especially with the way the economy is right now and more. That's such a hot topic too. A lot of other things I dive into, I try to put a focus on what's the future, what's ag tech look like, what are all the new hot toys that are out there that can make a producer's operation better, all the new seed, chemical, fertilizer, biological technology that's being released from companies, drones, things of that nature, autonomous tractors and equipment, see and spray, and I could go on and on, but I can nerd out a little bit on some of that stuff, just because I think it's cool and it's fun to hear about what people are talking about and actively working on. Because at the end of the day, the vibe that I get from everyone I talk to in the industry, and I talk to a lot of people in the industry on a daily, weekly basis, whether I need to, want to, or if I should talk to that many people that I do, the vibe I get is everyone is trying to get to the ultimate end goal. How can we continue to make farming and ranching in the U.S. viable, prosperous, continue to feed our country and our world? And I think everyone's end goal is to try and do that as best as we possibly can. And so that's, really what my end goal is I want to tell those stories day in and day out and follow the trends, talk about what's hot, talk about what's not, talk about things that maybe get hot for a while, then they fade away. And it's like, hey, we need to revisit that conversation because it's still out there. So juggling all that day in and day out can be a challenge, but I like to do it. And, I've said this a number of times in the last several weeks. With everything going on, it feels like I'm drinking out of a fire hose. So, I mean, there's many more things I could probably say, but those are some of the big top of mind things right now for me that I think have really been the focal points for the last couple of months.
And something that you just said actually completely took me by surprise is the mental health part of it, because you expect input prices, you expect technology, you would, of course, there's I dabbled in finance for a bit. Somebody talked me into changing industries, and I dumped marketing for a bit because I graduated college during the whole '06 crisis, and the first head that gets cut off is marketing. So my wife and I both work in marketing. We both, I can't remember how many times we got laid off, but there was a lot of eating graham crackers for dinner and bathrobes, right? There's a whole lifestyle of all right, next job. But during that time period, I ended up going into finance, and I was told very early on, if you want to get absolutely just wrecked as an investor, go into commodities, because it's the most volatile thing that exists as far as investment and stability. They just shift from year to year, and then there's that delayed adjustment that producers have, where it's the market can change, but the producers have crops in the ground. So it's there's this push-pull in there. The mental health part is not something I thought about initially with any conversations that I've had. Tell me a little bit about that. Some of the conversations you have. Is it just people keeping stable with work-life balance? Is it the shift in the markets that's kind of affecting people, and where they're started taking their priority notes? What's going on? Yeah. What's sort of that realm look like?
There's a lot of things there, I think, to unpack. And a lot of conversations I have with folks, on the farm, folks I know that are close family friends back home, or folks that I've never met before and have a conversation with them, or I'll get emails from listeners about things like that. And it's, harvest season is always stressful. We're wrapping that up. I mean, you're going constantly. You're trying to beat the weather in many cases. Sometimes you're working. You're always working sun up to sundown, but you're working 24/7, and that could take a mental toll on you and your family and more. But I think the added layer, the stress, is that we've had sub $4 corn and $9 soybeans. And when you put everything into the ground this spring, that wasn't the price. And you're looking at, how am I going to make it to next year when I got the operating note coming due and all these different things. And unfortunately, there's been stories of folks who have taken their lives because that stress was so immense, that weight of, am I going to be able to do what I love? And am I going to be able to plant a crop next year? Or am I going to be able to, bring in, cattle and calve this winter and things of that nature? Like, am I going to be able to do what I love to do? Because that stress, that financial stress, is mounting. And, I know some folks will say, well, they didn't do a good job of balancing their books. But, we've been starting to see more of the stats out there of, you have the costs of your inputs, 200-300 times more than what they were pre-pandemic, for instance, and commodity prices that have come way back down to, the price levels of the 1970s. I mean, that cost price squeeze, that's just, the math doesn't math there. And so I think that's been one of the biggest things that has weighed on people here, and their mental health is struggling with, how am I going to make it to next year? And that's predominantly the biggest thing that I hear. And then you also have the component of farmers, ranchers, folks in rural America, tough people, proud people. They don't want to seek out some of that help. So there's been more from that outreach side, a lot of groups. I think of Rural Minds, and I'll even throw Farm Rescue in there. They help a lot of folks in tragedy times. And there's so many different folks out there who are trying to lend a helping hand. And so I guess the biggest message I say to people is, if you are struggling, talk to someone, call up a friend. It doesn't have to be a professional necessarily, but talk to someone. Or if, I'm someone and I see my friend struggling, you see something, say something, kind of thing. There's a crisis going on in rural America right now in many ways, and it's not talked about enough. And, the term farm crisis has been brought about here lately with prices, but there's a mental health crisis, I think, as well, in many cases, that I wish more folks would just put more emphasis on, and myself included. I need to put more emphasis on it on my programs, because it's one of those things where I don't ever want to see someone take their own life or whatever the case may be, because they're worried about if they're going to have a farm next year.
I was going to say, that's, you're talking about the most dire of situations where there's people that have taken their own lives in this, but it's also, it's also just the family unit, right? Yes. Where the effect on the family unit, on what that could do. A buddy of mine that I grew up with I think he's 4th generation cattle rancher, 3rd or 4th, but it operates a good sized ranch out of Idaho. And it's, somebody I grew up with, and we've talked a little bit about it, but you're going to sleep and waking up dreaming about cattle. You're dreaming about logistics. Mm-hmm. You're thinking about it. You're waking up, before the sun comes up, getting the things done, moving cattle from pasture to pasture, doing that kind of thing. And by the time you get home at night, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and you do the same thing the next day. The opportunity that is there to actually even think about your own mental health doesn't exist. And by the time you're on top of it, you might be in mental crisis mode, where it's not just a conversation you need to actually really do the work. And is there the time to do it? And it's that balancing act that you're always going through. It's any kind of labor position, right? You go and grind away, and by the time you're done, you're so exhausted you might not even think about talking. And by the time you realize that you're behind the 8 ball on that, it's too late as far as you need more intensive, like you've got to get into it and root around and figure out what's going on in the thought processes. And it's just, you speak to that, and it's like, it's something like I said, it's something I hadn't really considered as a whole, as an industry-wide thing, but that's a very big thing. Like, that's a very big topic for sure.
And I'll even take it a step further there too. You know, it's more predominantly on the producers themselves, but even some of us in ag media or across the industry in different sectors. I mean, and I think we're all a little bit stressed out. You know, I said, like, I feel like I've been drinking from a fire hose, and there's a lot of times where I'll see, you know, comments on our YouTube channel to, you know, interviews and reports I'll put out. And a lot of it is what I dub tourists to our channel that don't have any part in agriculture. They just want to start a political fight.
I was just going to say, it's going to be a political thing at that point.
Yeah.
Like, I want to fight about politics now.
Yeah. And the dumb comments that you get, and a lot of them, you know, it's taken with a grain of salt, but I've had many conversations with guests I have on, and even myself, I have to stop and take a check and go, yeah, okay, well, you know, it's someone behind a keyboard. Like, I just got to let it roll off my back, you know. But, you know, we're out here in ag media or in the ag industry trying to advocate as best as we can for farmers and ranchers and help tell their story. And then, you know, you just got people that are, you know, mad about this or mad about that and don't like, you know, one sentence you said in a 7-minute conversation. And then it just, you know, that spirals too. I just think there's a lot out there that ties in with the mental health conversation for agriculture as a whole, and really the entire country as a whole. But that's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down. But it needs to be a bigger conversation, and maybe just a little more compassion out there by some folks, you know, and understanding too. It could go a long way.
It makes things difficult. I've always made comments on my team here at work, and just working with my team and getting your headspace right is always difficult. Like in any position where you dedicate some of your life to any role that you do for work, and getting through the concept of, in the world, that there are problem solvers and there are problem finders. And if you are a problem solver, you have to balance your time on how much you're going to respond to a problem finder, because someone who finds problems is never going to stop. They never stop finding problems, and in that mental state, wherever they are right now, and I empathize with it, but as far as the value they bring to the table to the other people around them, all you're doing is giving those people more work, and you haven't contributed. And so it's a non-contribution mindset, to where a solver is going to jump in and be like, okay, well, how can I fix that? And then before long, you're depleted. And the person who finds problems is never going to stop. But you run out of that energy to find the things to solve. And it's unless you recognize it and are able to mitigate it, it can overwhelm you. And it's every working environment ever. You know, those dynamics exist. So I think a lot of that stuff is amplified now, especially with social media, and it can absolutely wipe you out. Every word that you say goes under scrutiny, and then you get those responses, and it's hard not to let that take a hit on you. Like that's the nature of social media. And that's a whole different topic. We could roll all the way down a rabbit hole on that one. Yeah,
we go down a long rabbit hole there, but just, I mean, bookending that, it's important to check in with yourself and check in with your family and your friends, and make sure everyone's doing okay, because there's a lot of concern out there across agriculture right now.
As far as, you know, you brought up inputs. Of course, we've all seen the cost of inputs go. And I think 3 years ago, I talked to Gary Schnitke out of University of Illinois, great agroeconomist out of there. And we it made it in a joking term, but it was kind of one of those dark humor jokes, is the costs have gone up. Once a company gets the cost up, it's not coming back down. Nobody says, I just made record profits, I would not like to make those profits anymore. So even if the problem of logistics goes away, the price is going to remain. And there's always logistics in there that plays a role too. Like there's this ever evolving dynamic. Have you seen conversations start to shift more towards regenerative agriculture to deal with some of the input cost increases, or how viable is that? Are people starting to position themselves into more, I want to say receptive, but are they looking at the logistics of that a little more now?
I think yes, I'm hearing more of those conversations. I've had plenty of those conversations on the show, and I welcome them. I think though too that the part of the issue is that you have just so many folks who, commercial production agriculture, they've done something a certain way for 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years, that it's tough for folks. It's tough to get folks to change in agriculture. And so I think it's an uphill battle in many ways for regenerative ag, or, getting folks to buy into cover crops and things like that. Not to say that I don't think, there is plenty of good there. And I think that there's more momentum in those areas than there ever has been. And I think at the end of the day, whether it's those thoughts, whether it's something else that we don't foresee or whatnot, there's going to have to be a reckoning, so to speak, for U.S. agriculture. We, at this point, we're very good at what we do. We produce a ton of food in this country. Our farmers are very good at it, but we also are starting to run into some oversupply situations. And so, when does the other shoe drop, or when does the rubber meet the road, whatever you want to say? I think there's going to have to be some tough conversations here as an industry about how we go forward, in the years ahead. And do we see more adoption of regenerative ag practices and things of that nature? Again, I think there's a lot of momentum there right now than there ever has been. And so I'll be curious to see where that goes. But I think with the inputs, you're seeing it. It's going to get to a point where farmers are just going to say, I can't afford to plant this. They're going to start cutting back on certain inputs, and then that's going to affect yields and performance and you name it. And I think that's ultimately what might bring some of the prices down. But then again, I don't think there's a perfect answer to the input situation. And it's probably going to be a combination of some farmers simply pulling back, adoption of regenerative ag, other things. There's going to have to be that shift. And I think we're starting to see it, at least the early signs of it right now, Mac.
Yeah, and that's back to the soy topic and stuff, where you're looking at the cost of soy and corn, where if you take the average cost of input and the average cost of operations, there's no stat line that brings the commodity price above those margins. And it's where they're sitting, where they need to be for profitability, and where they are is just not penciling out to where it's like, what do you do? You've got stuff in the ground, you're going to take a hit, and there's all these things externally that are influencing where you're at. Like, that's the pinch. Like, that's thing. And commodity prices in those areas. And I'm relying on smarter minds than myself, but what I'm hearing is, that like those are not going to go into the black anytime soon. And, with any change, like you mentioned, like there's the change resistance. Like, we've done this for hundreds of years. I want to continue to do this. There's the upfront cost. If you change something in your operation, there's the logistical cost of figuring it out the first year you run it, and then learning from your mistakes. How do you get somebody to accept that you're going to take a bigger hit than you would normally take because you changed something, but it will pay off in the long run? Like that whole mindset thing there too. When somebody's got their hand in the dirt, they don't want to go through all that. Like, okay, I don't want to take a hit this year. I got to feed my family. There's that whole dynamic that is sort of opening up right now, I think, nationwide.
And I think to that as well, there is a lot of brand loyalty, I mean,
Oh yeah.
someone's planted a certain variety for, the last 20 years that maybe just changed with the new technologies that have come out, but there's that piece of it as well. And, I think a lot of the companies that are out there, they're doing great work trying to develop new technologies, new products to make things more efficient. But then it comes down to getting someone to try something new that they've never done before, and that's just really ultimately the tough part of the conversation. If I've planted pioneer corn for the last 30 years, I want to plant what I know, not someone else trying to come down the driveway and sell me something else, and that's just I laugh, but I hear that so much time and time again. I was with a friend he runs a feed mill in Iowa here recently, and a customer appreciation party. And I was just hanging around and having some of those conversations. And you hear it time and time again of, well, so the X variety did pretty good for me this year. Probably just going to do that again next year. Like, that's the thing. You get something you like and it works, and you don't want to venture outside of that, necessarily too much. And so I think that's where a lot of companies are trying to, come in here and really have to get, testimonials and more to try and convince folks to look at some of these new technologies out there. We've been having the conversation for years. I'll continue to have these conversations until one day push is going to come to shove and things are going to have to change, I think, is where we're headed, Mac.
I'm laughing because my family business growing up was a feed mill. My grandpa and my great grandpa built a feed mill, like carrying wheelbarrows up ramps and dumping it into forms and making the walls. Yeah. And growing up, that was my thing. Is I would always get shipped off to live with my grandparents for the summer to help out at the mill, and I would just do the thing with my uncle and my grandpa. And all through growing up, everything that they did when the thing was built, they still ran all the same equipment. Like, everything was legacy equipment. And we sewed all the sacks by hand with these custom needles. I don't know if anybody out there has ever, I don't know how many people have stabbed themselves in the hand with one of the damn sack needles with the baling twine strips that you could do that with. And you had it down where you sew the ear and then you run down the bag and then you sew the next ear. I did that my entire life. And it was always like, why can't you figure out a better way to do this? And my grandpa was always like, I don't need to. I can do everything I need to do with this at the same speed that I've always done it. Yeah. And I go to college and I come back and they have one of those, it's a handheld sack sewing machine. And I was so pissed because it was like, I leave and you get this. Like, I went through and stabbed my hand with that stupid needle, like trying to race my grandpa all the way through growing up. And you finally, you get to a point where the technology is unavoidable, and you just kind of have to. And they got to there, and it's the same story on a bigger scale when you look at all of ag, where it's like you don't need to change something, but eventually, it becomes the thing that you need to do. It's like you got to take that next step.
And it can be broken down into different sectors of ag too. I think that conversation, it pushes coming to shove more on the seed, chem, biological front than it is necessarily on fertilizer, for instance. You mentioned that earlier, like potash, phosphate, nitrogen, like it is what it is, that's not really changing. Or on the equipment front, yes, I could go out and get the fancy new bells and whistles on a brand new combine that basically does the work for me. Or like, I think about this, the owner of our company is a farmer in North Dakota, spring wheat, soybeans, sugar beets. His equipment, it's 10 years old plus. He can fix it. He knows what he's got. It's paid off. He gets the job done. He prefers that versus having all the new bells and whistles. So I think it's also broken down into different segments of this industry where, technology is forcing changes in some areas and maybe not so much in other areas right now. So that's another interesting nugget too, that I think gets lost in the shuffle sometimes, but it's, I've had those conversations too over the last couple of years. So that's another interesting piece, I think, as well, Mac.
I was going to say too, cost barriers too. You get used to certain equipment, you know how to fix it. That's great. But, take the average cost of a combine. Like, how much has that increased in the last 10 years? You're talking, $1 million investment now. Like, cool. Let me just reach into my pocket and grab my $1 million, or I drown in debt for the next few years trying to pay this stupid thing off, hoping that the commodity price holds that I'm harvesting. Like,
yeah. And that's part of the cycle too. You bring that up and it makes me think about this. And it's another conversation that I'm starting to have more and more is, how in the world can a beginning farmer
barrier to entry
get into this industry today? Like it is unattainable to get into this industry in many cases today. I don't care how much grant help you get from USDA or this or that, like unless you are getting something coming down from generation to generation, I don't know how folks are getting into this industry today. And that is concerning to me. We've let costs get so far out of whack, even land costs. I'm sure, that's your guys' forte. I mean, the cost of land, all these different things. We have fostered a problem in agriculture that is going to take a long time, I think, to fully unwind, or maybe not unwind, but rebalance. And I think that it's starting to happen ever so slowly, but it's starting to happen. And those conversations are starting to ramp up more and more.
Yeah, you see, and you spoke to land cost, and that's sort of a thing, right? It's the real estate realm, but it's not what you classify as your typical real estate. Like it's not your HGTV kind of stuff, right?
No.
But land tends to shadow what you will see in real estate markets. Like everything you just spoke to, you could sub out ag and throw in real estate as far as people getting new houses, like younger people being able to get into real estate, get into their own home. That's very difficult now. And you see that market starting to shift. Land tends to lag just by a little bit from those markets, where you see what we've been looking at the last few years in land values has been a plateau. And everyone's been speaking to it for about 2 years now. And now you're seeing plateau to like maybe a 20% adjustment in some areas. That's a more drastic scenario. Well, when you look at some of the more, I want to call it like the trendy areas to move, like I'm going to speak to like Western mountain towns, like still rural life and still incorporates ranches. Those values are holding a little more stubborn, where you see some of the areas that are like more rural, working farms, working ag, that is less like, a vacation hotspot, right? You see a lot of areas that are vacation hotspots where ranches are getting broken up and turning it into like, mountain cabins. And then you see some of the areas where it's not as much that, where they're going to move a little quicker than the places where land's been broken up. And so you have these different tiered areas where prices are holding steady. And then you have the expectation market for land values. Somebody who bought land last year at $2,400 an acre doesn't want to sell the year afterwards at $2,000 an acre. No one wants to take that hit, but the market's telling you different. And so there's a push-pull there, but the barrier to entry, because of the cost acceleration that we've seen in the last 5 years, it's very, very difficult. We've talked to finance companies. The more subsidized entities out there, like your farm loans and stuff like that, those move a little more. It's a little more difficult to get mobility because they're not as flexible. Some of the independent loan operations are a little more flexible, but then you incorporate risk into your loans. So you can come up with some original way to fund a farm for a new farmer, but did they just absorb, a high risk environment? Did they go with a bad actor? There's all of that kind of stuff that plays in. There's a lot of moving pieces right now in the markets.
And it's, I say I wanted to go move back home to northern Iowa and move away from middle Tennessee, and which is something I've thought about too, because the cost of housing in middle Tennessee is crazy. Like I could fare probably a lot better back home where I grew up. But it's like, say I wanted to really get into the farming side myself and get out of media and buy 100 acres or whatever the case is in a farm. I could call on every single company and contact that I know and try to do everything I can to set myself up right and correctly and all the tech and everything else. And I still don't think I could come out in the black. I even 5 years down the road, if I did every single thing right, I don't think I could come out, on the upside on that right now. And that's what's scary, is that barrier to entry right now is so real. And it's all coming with a large generational transfer of ownership in agriculture that is already underway. And there's so many things. You get some of that where maybe the family doesn't want anything to do with the farm, and then you're getting bigger operations and folks who already have
more commercial entities that have the leverage to make the purchase. And that's sort of what we don't want.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what's kind of playing out.
I want to see more independent farmers and ranchers versus commercial entities that own, 7 combines and a fleet of grain semis and, have basically own 3 counties worth of land. Like, I don't think anybody wants to see that continue, but then again, I mean, that's capitalism for you. I mean, there's so many layers to this that I just hope, for the sake of U.S. agriculture, that some of these things get themselves ironed out before it's too late.
I want to shift focus of it here for a second, because you brought it up a couple times, and I want to ask you what is the coolest piece of tech that you have discussed in the last, let's say, few months?
Drones are cool. I mean, I think everybody loves drones, and seeing that technology and some of the, how you can incorporate some of that to make life safer, I think, especially spraying and targeted, see and spray, that kind of thing. That tends to be some of the really cool stuff that I hear about constantly, and the adaptation of drones on the farm. Autonomy too. I know that's not a new conversation, but just getting to see some of the advancements there, that tends to be really cool. Seeing, how you can, especially as labor is an issue, like all the different robots and things that you can use to, whether it's specialty crops or even out in a quarter soybean or wheat field with a tractor that drives itself and things like that. I mean, not to replace humans, but some of that technology that is out there, it does beg the question of, does this make my operation easier, or can I fill a hole that has maybe come in because I don't have the labor that I need in certain cases or whatnot? So there's stuff like that that's always interesting to me. And then even too, just the work that's done on the crop side, the new changes, the biological space. I think some of the myths of biologicals is getting cleared up more and more. And
GMOs, you mean? Or
well, just the different, you got biostimulants and biofertilizers and all those things that are out there to try and replace certain things. And I think there's some really cool, beneficial things out there. And it's neat to hear how X product can help, in trials, can get rid of, A, B, C, D, E, and F. So it's cool for me to hear about some of that stuff too. Do
you hear much about have people started discussing, you mentioned drone technology, and I was thinking more in our space, it's a lot of photography and stuff like that, but you're talking industrial drone technology, which is absolutely cool. Mm-hmm. Does the DJI ban play into any of that? Are people starting to go into that? Is that going to be a barrier?
I've had that conversation actually, and there's a couple companies in the US that make drones that have really kind of, they've, to their credit, they've honed in on that, and they've tried to capitalize on the market with the DJI ban. And so I think that may be a bit of a barrier unless the US starts to figure out how to produce more of its own drone technology. And I think the other thing too, that the entire drone industry worldwide is still trying to really figure out is, how do we deliver a big enough payload? When I say that, I'm not talking like weapons, but like, how do we attach big enough tanks to where we can put, premix in or whatever fungicide or herbicide in to be able to go out and fly along tree lines and power lines and things like that to, target and spray for certain, weeds or diseases or pests or whatever. But how can we deliver enough products so we're not, flying in a tenth of a mile circle and having to come back to a trailer and load every 15 minutes. I think that's one of the biggest things I'm seeing as well, that the industry has been struggling with, but getting better with. So I think that's just the evolution of drones themselves. And, I was at the Farm Progress Show here this past fall, August in Illinois, and there was a lot more drone activity at that show. So it goes to show me that people are starting to figure it out more and more and provide more solutions out there for drone technology on the farm.
You're going to send me down a rabbit hole. I'm very curious about the ROI on a industrial drone spraying versus like the row sprayers. Like a row, I think it's a product. It's not the equipment, but like a rogator versus a Terragator kind of thing of spraying crops, where it's like, it's just it's a giant expensive piece of equipment, but does the coverage work out ROI wise on industrial? I'm gonna have to give me a rabbit hole to dive down.
You might have to dive down that and find a couple experts better than me on that. But I know a few people in the Midwest who have built, successful businesses in the last couple of years, custom spraying, and they're using drones. They're not using helicopters or planes, the crop dusters. I mean, nothing against those, but they're starting to go away, and more drones are happening. Just, from a safety standpoint, I think is where a lot of that's coming in. And that's a lot of the message I hear from the National Ag Aviation Association, NAAA. They're starting to talk more about how drones and traditional crop dusters, how all of this can coexist and make things safer, especially, during those busy summer months when we're having that application out there across, several thousand fields in the Midwest. So.
Yeah. And so I love the technology conversation, because it's you don't think about ag as being a tech space when you're outside of ag, but when you're inside of ag, you realize how much technology plays a role, because it changes every year. And even the technologies of water management, that's the ones that I think are just huge, especially the last few years, where you're running AI systems to monitor water output and water levels in soil, and being able to monitor that stuff automatically and make it more efficient. Those things to me are really exciting, especially out west where it's dry as a bone for the last, 10 years. Well, what is it? 15 actually, but it's just an evolving thing that I think is it's exciting and it's necessary. I also don't like the fact that they have to adapt to that kind of thing, because it means there's a drought, but the fact that they is great. Outside of the corn and soy conversation, what are are there emerging commodities that people are excited about that are sort of taking a foothold?
There's a lot of conversation about things like canola, winter canola, camelina, and some of that goes into the sustainable aviation fuel conversation. Or are there ways that when we pull corn off a field in October, November, can we plant some of these crops that are, can overwinter and start getting into a double crop type situation? I'm hearing more of that happening. I'm not going to say that's getting adopted full scale, but I'm hearing more and more of that. The last several years, I mean, corn is king, beans are second king. I mean, we've seen the expansion of growing corded soybeans in areas that traditionally have not done that. Your wheat areas, your cotton belt areas, we have displaced things like sunflowers and canola and you name it. I think some of those commodities, though, I think they may start to make their way back in the second half of this decade, simply because we've gotten to the point where maybe we've started to plant too much corn and too much soybeans. And so some of these folks, but then that's going to come back to the price conversation, but does it make more sense for me to go back to putting in spring wheat in North Dakota versus corn or soybeans, or maybe I need to go back to more cotton or sorghum. Sorghum's another one. Maybe I need to start looking at more sorghum. So I think we're at a point where maybe some producers, if corn and beans really don't start to pencil out the way they did, maybe they start to go back to planting some other of those commodities that have kind of gone, not by the wayside, but they've not been the center of attention, so to speak, for the last several years. So, I mean, I'm maybe opting out of the answer a little bit there of your question, but that's kind of the feeling I get. Yeah. Maybe we're going to start to see some of these commodities, be cool again, so to speak. So
you're saying that we're not headed into a kale boom?
I don't think we're headed into a kale boom anytime soon. But
my investment advisor.
Yeah, my thought though is predominantly like a lot of my focus is east of the Rockies and down in the southeast and kind of the eastern Midwest. Like, what are we growing in the heartland? What are we growing in the plains? Like, because I think of California, and I know a lot of agriculture there, Florida, Georgia, a lot of other states where it's predominantly specialty crops, things like that. And I don't see that changing as much.
Tree nut is huge out there. Yes.
Yeah. I don't see that changing as much. Whereas it's what's happening in the Midwest, what's happening in the plains here in the US, what's happening up into Canada even too. Like what are we going to be putting into the ground in 2030? I don't envision corn going away as king anytime soon, but instead of us planting nearly 100 million acres of corn, maybe it gets back down into the high 80s. I don't know. Just kind of the feeling I'm getting right now is that I think we're going to see some of that shift back to other commodities.
Yes, and I love the outlook, and I love the projection of it, and like you're trying to project out into the future of it. That's a conversation that's going to evolve. I want to be conscientious of your time too, because I booked you for an hour, and I don't want to like drag you out. I want to give you a chance to sort of talk about the work that your stations are doing, and how people can catch it, contribute, participate, and listen, and become a part of the community that you are sort of fostering.
I appreciate that. And, for like I kind of said at the open, there's a lot of legs of our company's stool and everything right now. So, the best thing I could say is agricultureofamerica.com. That's a great way to start to listen to AOA. Find one of our local affiliate stations. The list is there on the website. Podcast version, of course, is available every single day after, the live show airs to our affiliates. That's a lot of ways that people listen is via podcast. They may not be listening via the radio anymore. We're working on going to be putting more of that show's content on YouTube. We just haven't got there yet. That's like a first quarter 2026 kind of thing. But like Market Talk, the other show I have, that's all on YouTube. Market Talk Ag. There's the website as well, which is markettalkag.com and americanagnetwork.com. It's another great way to find more information, find all of our programs. We have a mobile app too. It's the Farm and Ranch Media mobile app. Go download that, get access to all of our programming, all of our videos, all of our web stories, content, etc., markets, everything else. Biggest thing I say is I just hope people seek us out, listen. I welcome emails, comments, you name it, good, bad, ugly, and different, because I want to genuinely tell the story of agriculture. And whether it's the day in, day out of what's happening in the markets or if it's something cool with regenerative ag or this or that, like please, if you're doing something cool in the industry, send it my way, because I want to highlight it if I can, and bring it to the attention of a broader audience. And I think that's the cool thing that I remind myself is the audience that we have and that we're building. And at the end of the day, it's all about telling the story of ag, and educating folks on what's happening in U.S. agriculture. And I'm humbled to get to deliver that message every day for as long as I'm allowed to deliver it. And so that's kind of us in a nutshell. We're just trying to do the best we can every day. And so hopefully folks seek us out and become listeners and viewers and want to learn more.
What's the, I'm going to leave you with a question here before I let you run away, because I've held you down here. What's the coolest or most surprising guest that you have had in recent memory?
Oh boy. Man, there is one that comes to mind. I will say it is cool when I get to talk to elected officials. Because not everybody gets to do that. And whatever your political stance is, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. It is just cool from my position to get to ask them questions every day. I mean, I get to talk to Senator Chuck Grassley once a month. Not everyone gets to do that. And that's especially me growing up in Iowa, that's really cool.
That is, I dig that. That's neat. Yeah.
There was one though that was interesting. They reached out, and I think it was at the beginning of the shutdown. I have to look back, but this was just a couple of weeks ago, and it was Congressman Jonathan Jackson from, I believe it's Illinois' 1st district. If I'm saying that wrong, I know it's kind of just somewhat, southern part of Chicago and then a little bit into rural areas.
I think if you get the state right, you're good.
Yeah. I know it's Illinois, and I know that's the general geography, and I think it's District 1. I'm going to look that up after we're done here, just because that's the way I am. But he wanted to come on. He's on the ag committee. He's trying to talk more with folks in rural America. He wanted to, discuss his stance on food stamp benefits, SNAP benefits, and the ag economy and more. And it's Reverend Jesse Jackson's son. And
okay.
I came away from that conversation with him, and I said, to me, that is someone who he's learning about ag, and he seemed to genuinely want to have a conversation and talk about issues. And he may not know everything, but he's wanting to talk to people about it because he has constituents that are in rural parts of his district. And so to me, and they reached out to me, I would have never thought twice about it. And he said, "Hey, we really want to be on the show." I said, "Absolutely. Open door policy. I'll talk to anybody." And so that was a really cool recent conversation for me. I'm sure I'm missing some. I've had the opportunity to talk to secretaries of agriculture multiple times. That's always an interesting conversation to have and to get to prod them a little bit, whether it's our current one, Brooke Rollins, or it was previously Tom Vilsack, things like that. Ask them things about, what is going on at USDA that impacts farmers and ranchers. So those are cool conversations. I mean, genuinely, there are a lot of folks I have on regularly, but there's always that conversation that comes out of left field that surprises me time and time again. I'm sure I'm missing some, but that's the ones that come to my mind, I guess, right now. Or just, the fact that a lot of folks, I can foster a relationship with them and hopefully be a bridge between the folks who listen to our show to some of these folks who are elected officials, industry experts, whatever the case is. I generally want to be that bridge and, bring their questions that I'm hearing from them or things they send me and asking that of these people who are guests on my show. At the end of the day, I just enjoy getting to be that bridge. And, there's a lot of cool conversations that have come out of it. And I hope there are many more to come. I have not interviewed a president yet. I know there's been very few farm broadcasters who have done that. And who knows, maybe in the next, if I'm doing this for another 25, 30 years, maybe I'll have that opportunity. But outside of that, there's been plenty of cool conversations I've been fortunate enough to have. So
Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate the fact that we've gotten you on this podcast. That's very cool. I'll be pulling for you. I'm going to be crossing my fingers for the president interview. That'd be rad.
I don't know if it would ever happen or which president it might be.
Put it out there. You put it out there now. Someone's going to hear it
out into the universe. Yeah. So it may happen. Hard to say. Who knows? But hey, it could happen. So.
Yes, sir. Well, Jesse, thank you very, very much for taking the time to chat with us today. Hope to get you on here again, man.
Anytime. You happy to have you guys on my shows, and likewise would love to come back and have a conversation with you, Mac. Really, really appreciate the time and letting you or having you let me be on your podcast. Appreciate it.
Excellent, man. Much appreciated. And yes, I might take you up on that. I might be a guest on yours.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Thank you. This concludes episode number 160 for the National Land Podcast with Jesse Allen, Farm and Ranch Director for the American Ag Radio Network, host of the Agriculture of America show, and host of Market Talk, the podcast related to agriculture. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com. And please remember, subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss our next awesome episode. Thank you. And enjoy your weekend and holidays. I think I'm going to say that a lot here lately because we're in that season, and I'm just going to. It's not necessarily a holiday podcast. I'm just going to wish you a happy holidays for like the next month straight. All right, thank you and enjoy.